Well, it is great to be with you today. And David Marquet, it is a pleasure to have you on my Lead Bravely live stream.
Huzzah! Hello, all listeners and viewers.
And you are in Florida, is that right?
I am, yes. Thank you very much.
Yes, yes. Well, David, as I was sharing with you just before we went live, your book, and I'm just going to give a little shout out to Turn the Ship Around, is an awesome book and probably one of the, I think, most relevant, useful, and inspiring leadership books there are. So I'm just thrilled to have a chance to talk to you about your experience, but also to kind of mine you for all of your golden nuggets when it comes to creating an environment that does empower people and leading by intent and versus by command. So yeah. We just want to kick off by telling me, how do you define leadership anyway?
Leadership is creating the environment for people to be great just the way they are.
Awesome. And how did you arrive at that?
By unlearning everything I learned about leadership. Yeah. Now, that's a little glib. In a nutshell, I was a submarine commander. I was taught, I was instructed, I was told our leadership textbook said leadership is directing the thoughts, plans, and actions of others. Thoughts, plans, and actions. And I was really good at telling people what to do. And it's a model where leaders make decisions and they get the team to do what they're supposed to. So we divide humanity into the deciders and the doers. We don't even think about it. It's the pervasive model. And through a quirk of fate, I ended up going to a submarine once I got to the command level that I'd never stepped on before. And so all of a sudden I'm thrown to this environment where I don't know the right answers. And we were forced to do something different. There was a lot of panic. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of reaction. There was a lot of double tracking. But we ended up in a really amazing place. And it was because instead of viewing myself as a decision maker, basically I viewed myself as the designer of the system by which great decisions were made by the team. And I also had a mindset which I call care, don't care, which means care deeply and passionately about the people entrusted to me and our mission, what we're trying to do, but don't care about the bureaucratic consequences to me. I was aided in this mindset by a couple of other things that were going on, which I can talk about. But basically, we turned it from one thinker and one decider and 150 doers to 150 thinkers, which was, of course, amazing. We set records for performance and morale, and we created more submarine commanders than any other submarine. So that's sort of the story in a nutshell. But it all happened because the first step in this whole process was me stopping telling people what to do, which was scary, anxiety-inducing, and bad.
Okay.
and hard, not bad, hard for me.
Yeah. Well, I get that's hard. And that's where I want to just kind of stop and dive in there a little, because, helping people to live and lead more bravely is something I feel really passionate about. And fear gets in the way of that. That fear of, well, what if they mess up? What if you lose your role over there? Like, there's so fear and risk aversion often reigns supreme. So what is it that you have called on to help you kind of stay course through those moments when you're lying in bed at night, or you're just going, what if they mess up? What if all the what ifs start spiraling?
Yeah. So number one is, I think we have an overly binary view of quote empowerment. And over again, we see people who articulate it as if it were a light switch. So in other words, it's I tell you what to do. No, flip the switch. You tell me, or maybe even you just do it. We think that this over binary mindset makes it scarier. And it's more, you think about more like a dimmer switch. So I can just gradually ramp up the level of involvement in the team and decision making. And it starts with description. You don't start with, no, you tell me, what would you do in this situation? You just start with, well, just tell me more about the situation. And then people start talking. It's safe for them. It's safe for you. Then we go to assessment. Okay, now what do you think? What caused this? What's the client thinking? Why is it acting this way? And only then we do go to action. Now, our magic word was intent. And here's why it's magic word. Number one, it invokes the communication that happens with a permission-based organization, because people will talk to you before they do something. Instead of saying, hey, I'd like permission to change the marketing plan, launch the software product, submerge the submarine, they say, this is what I intend to do. Next week, we intend to launch the product. You get to ask questions, you get to veto it. This is what makes it safe. There's a famous study where a psychologist showed up at a school in the city. There were fences. Kids were playing in the playground. Fences created a boundary between, these are like chain link fences, you can see through them, between the school and the street. They said, oh, fences, barriers are bad. Fences are bad. They took down the fences. You know where the kids played? In the middle of the playground. When we remove the clarity of the barrier, we don't know where it transitions from safe to unsafe. Therefore, our wiring as human beings, which is to keep the species alive, is to say, well, I don't really know. So I'm just going to play in the middle of the playground. And so it actually makes people act in a less safe way. It's those clear guidelines, clear railings, clear ownership, which allow people to act with full authority right up to the edge of their authority. And that's what you want. So I think whatever you can do as a leader, there are other things in terms of how you react when people don't quote have it right and that kind of thing. But it's really important, I think, the sense of clear boundaries, because you're removing the uncertainty that triggers that fear impulse that you're talking about.
Yeah. I guess, I get that it's another thing when it comes to managing when people aren't going about things the way that you would want them to. Obviously, empowerment and delegating downward and trusting others to make decisions doesn't mean people aren't accountable, and it doesn't mean there's not consequences, etc. So how do you manage accountability around that when you're like, I'm going to entrust you to figure this out, here's the intent, and obviously you want to think that everyone's, you assume positive intent, but how have you managed at times when someone maybe that you've got to address a performance issue?
Yeah, it's easy, because the reason most organizations work like this: hey, this is what I want you to do. Here are the resources. Here's the timeline. And then 3 months later, it doesn't come out the way I want you to do it. So therefore, I'm going to try and hold you accountable. In other words, I want to spark a feeling of you spark a feeling in you that, oh yeah, I should have done better. I'm responsible, whatever. But it's hard, because ultimately I was actually the person who made all the key decisions and controlled the resources. So in an intent-based organization, it's hard to describe, but we never really talked about accountability, because people come to me and say, Captain, I intend to do this. And I'd say, let me ask some questions. Okay, fine. And then 3 months later, it didn't work out, or we learned stuff. Then they come to me like, oh my gosh, we screwed this up. It's the ownership that results in an innate sense of accountability. You don't need to hold people accountable. That's the problem. If you feel you need to hold people accountable, you have the wrong fundamental structure. It's because they didn't have ownership over the decision.
Yeah.
So it's in an organization where people own the decision, like, oh, the engineers at Volkswagen should be held accountable for, yeah, they didn't own the decision to do the diesel G. How about the engineers at Boeing who did seven? No, they did not, like, the decision was made up in the boardroom. Oh, there were things ready to go. Let's launch 737 MAX. Oh, but I got to hold you accountable. You didn't speak up when you had the chance. This is just hypocrisy.
Yeah. And I think that's where you said it earlier, designing a system. You're going to look through that systems lens of where is the system here, not empowering people to take ownership and disempowering that. Got it. Something I like to think about is giving people a big why. Everyone's kind of pulling behind in the same direction toward a common mission with a compelling why. How did you communicate that? Where you were like became the highest performing sub in the fleet. How did you get everyone going, we care about that, from where they were?
Well, I was uncool. I was okay being uncool. I signed up in the Cold War, and there was a very compelling mission. And in 1989, when the wall came down and every sort of thing sort of ended with a whimper, we kind of had a made up mission. There's still I was very strongly driven by the sense of freedoms that were espoused in the Constitution. And I would just talk about them. It wasn't cool to talk about the Constitution. It wasn't cool to go to work and say, like, we're going to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's the oath you take. And then I would ask, so what does that mean? What did you just swore to defend this piece of paper? What does it say? Oh, I don't know, something about blah, blah. Well, and so I was kind of uncool that way, but that's not enough. You have to then cascade that down to, okay, what is our job? So today, should we turn right or left? Like, oh, I'm going to support the Constitution. It doesn't really help you with that decision. So we would spend a lot of time talking about our role in this bigger or construct of doing our job. Now, submarine commander, I had a benefit. Submarines don't half sink. They you all die together or you all come home together. And it's like as if we took the whole building that our company's housed in, we put detonation charges, 6 months, we all lived inside. And then if things went well, we'd open the door. If things didn't go well, we'd detonate it, we'd all be dead. So there's a certain sense of unity that's driven by that physical condition. But I think a lot of corporations the biggest problem corporations have in my mind is they lie. They say their mission is this, but lie is probably a little strong, but it's really that. Like we say it's for helping the environment, but it's really about making money. But it's more complicated. They don't acknowledge the internal tensions. Yeah. Oh, it's all about safety up to a cost. Well, you mean at some point we're going to not spend more money to make something safer? Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
But let's be honest about what those trade-offs are. So that's what we would talk about.
Yeah, lack of perhaps transparency on that front.
Yeah, honesty.
Yeah. Honesty.
Sorry, I can't let them off the hook.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I agree with you, and I think it's that incongruence. And I mean, people sense it. It's like, more rhetoric. And I don't know about you, but I've been at many events where sometimes I'm brought in to be a speaker, or I've done some coaching or consulting, and they're cynical. They're like, yeah, we've heard it before.
Right.
It sounds great, but do we really believe what they're saying? Do we think that they even really believe what they're saying?
Yeah.
And I think that's where, from a leadership perspective, if you aren't deeply grounded in your own values and core sense of purpose, it's going to be very hard to ignite that in others and build that trust. When it comes to building trust and, having where other people know that you've genuinely got their back. Obviously, it's crucial for anyone who wants to influence and inspire others to follow them, but actually to be leaders themselves. There has to be a strong level of trust. People need to know, you know what, I really know that you care about what I care about. And if I mess up, you have got my back and my best interests. What do you think sometimes, what are the behaviors that undermine that?
So first of all, we have a very specific definition of trust, which tends to differ from the common one. Mm-hmm. And but the formula for establishing trust is the practice of transparency over time, and this works both ways. So it's the leader being transparent, which often translates into vulnerability. This is what I'm worried about. I'm really only 80% sure about this. yeah, this assumption is really important, and it's probably got a 50-50 chance of being right. Things like that. At the same time, on the subordinate side, transparency means, hey, here's what I'm thinking about. We call it exposing your thinking for judgment, but inviting feedback so we can be stronger. So that's what we think the formula is. It hit me one day. I was riding in a friend's Tesla, and it was in Germany, and he put it on autopilot. And so we're driving along, and I'm looking at the dashboard, and the dashboard technically could be blank because the car's driving, but the car shows you its view. It shows you the world as it sees it, that it's reacting to. And so you look out the window and you see a truck, and then you look on the dashboard and you see that the car sees the truck, and you see that the road curves to the left, and you look at the dashboard and you can see that the car sees that the road curves to the left. And so it's that transparent, it's showing you. And imagine if it were just blank, like how much anxiety would that be? But the fact that you can see it, and it's not just one time. It can't be just right like for 10 seconds. It's got to be like, and then over time you say, yeah, it's like I don't look out the window and see a truck and look at the dashboard and there's no truck. Mm-hmm. So it's a transparency over time. Trust means I believe you're trying to do the right thing. It does not mean you have the right answer. This is super important, and it's different from what a lot of people say. The reason it's super important is because we need to do everything we can to separate our positions from our persons. And we commingle those things all the time. So, for example, in a meeting, I have the CFO and the COO talking, and CFO wants to do option A, COO option B. And, well, we can't do both, so somehow we make a decision, or I just decide, okay, we're going to do option A. We're going to do the CFO's option. And then what happens is the person typically looks at the COO, the loser, and says, hey, can you support the CFO with this? In other words, you just reconnected person with position. We would never say that. We say, hey, can you support option A? And over and over and over again, you got to really listen carefully to your language, because you will instinctively keep working those two things together. So it doesn't mean you're right. So when you come into a meeting, we're going to challenge you. Just because you say, I think we should turn left, we trust you, which means we believe you think we should turn left. But I can give you 100 examples where the most well-meaning people will come up with the wrong answers. We do it in workshops all the time. I just give them a hard math problem, or just ask them a statistical problem and say, your life depends on getting it right. It doesn't mean I'm going to get it right.
Yeah.
So we want to be ruthless and unemotional about dissecting the action. And that only happens because when we separate it from trust, because trust is an emotional feeling. I've said, well, don't you trust me? It feels bad. Yeah, I trust you. That's you. You wouldn't be here if we didn't trust you.
Yeah.
Whether or not this is right is not an issue of trust. It's an issue of reading the patterns, knowing the technical knowledge, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm fighting an uphill battle on this one, by the way.
I get one thing I do know about trust is we build it in small little deposits all the time.
Exactly. That's what that over time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what that over time feels like. So you bearing your soul once isn't going to make it happen.
No, but actually but speaking of bearing your soul and vulnerability, obviously, I mean, that's a term that we use a lot of these days, and sometimes comes with a whole lot of attachment to different meanings that others struggle to embrace. Like, I don't know about this vulnerability thing. I don't know if it's good for a leader to be vulnerable. Surely they need to show strength and decisiveness and certainty. And so how do you define the construct of vulnerability, and where have you at times struggled with vulnerability, and where do you see others maybe struggling with it?
I don't know if I have a definition for the construct of vulnerability. I'm going to dodge the question by saying this. For me, it's about being able to express your thoughts and beliefs in a non-deterministic way. So rather than saying what you'll see in the movies for businesses and submarines and that kind of thing is a very sort of known world. In other words, they show you an image, the truck is in front of me, the brake lights turned on, it's getting visibly bigger, therefore I'm getting closer to the truck. This is not the world you live in when you're a submarine commander. The brake lights turn on, but it's actually getting further away because the enemy's trying to spoof you. I mean, it doesn't really happen exactly like this, but your world has a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of uncertainty. They're trying to camouflage. They're trying to hide what they're doing. Anything about the future is not certain. So we want to have this sense of, oh, the enemy's there, charge over that hill. That's where they're going to be. So instead we say 60% chance the enemy's there, 40% chance they're actually over there. So if we go charge up the hill, we're going to get shot in the rear. So what we're going to do is we're going to start sending some people over that way. And I want everyone to be really paying a lot of attention to what happens over here. This is not, by the way, what happened when the United States went into Iraq. We had a very certain deterministic plan, which even though there were indications that one of the key assumptions, i.e. the population would support the troops, was false. It was known within the first 12 hours, at least at the first city. The plan was not adjustable, and their antenna weren't up looking for that kind of disconfirming information. So leaders have to stop saying, so does that make sense? Right? We good? Start asking, what doesn't make sense? How does it strike you as wrong? And that kind of thing. And maybe that's a bit of vulnerability because now you're saying, hey, how could my view of the world be wrong? Here's another thing. I'm doing a workshop. I got 5 tables of 5. I say, at your table, you got 60 seconds. What's the population of Ethiopia? And what happens? Exactly the same thing on every place on the planet. Someone says, well, I think it's 80 million. And then someone says, no, it's 85. Someone says it's 75. So it's this very sort of linear. And I know the group's been anchored by the first number. And so what you want to do instead is say, everyone write it down, then let's flip it over because I want to embrace the outliers. Then I look at the high and the low and I ask those people to speak. And I tell everyone in the middle to shut up. Like we don't need to hear from the people in the middle because that's what everybody thinks. So we need to hear from the people at the edges. But again, it's inviting someone who thinks differently than you to speak up and voice their opinion is probably a small act of vulnerability. Being curious when you hear something that's wrong. Hey, Captain, I intend to submerge the ship. And I'm like, no, that's in my head. It's like, no, that's screwed up. But then suppressing that and saying, oh, yeah, tell me more about it. How's that align? Truly being curious, not like a pretense so that I'm just waiting to then tell them they're wrong, but really opening to the possibility that they may actually be right. Let me figure that out. And then at the end, you can say, no, don't submerge. Yeah. But it's after I've been truly curious.
Yeah. No, I think I always say put curiosity above cleverness. And it's easy, I think, as people move into positions of greater power at times to become less curious and more attached to their own knowledge and insight and wisdom. And
genius and brilliance. And
yeah, like I've been doing this 25 years. Don't tell me I don't know what I'm doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of finish up by asking you, when it comes to really cultivating leaders of others, which, as you said, is ultimately a leader's role is to create the conditions for others to do their best work. I mean, that's my kind of spin on it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to emboldening others to take the lead, what if you were going to kind of summarize the most important conversations a leader could have with other people and the most important things that they can do that will help others, one, even to see themselves as leaders, because not everyone sees themselves as even having what it takes. And I do a lot in women's leadership, and a lot of women often go, oh, I'm not a leader, because it's like their mental template, it's very masculine.
Right.
And so for people to embolden people to see themselves as having what it takes to be a leader, what have you found to be the most impactful ways of doing that and conversations that you can have?
Well, first of all, what you're doing is great. The world will be a better place if more women thought of themselves as leaders. When they say, I don't view myself as a leader, what they're saying, in my mind, is I don't view myself as someone who wants to rock around in a puffy suit telling people what to do. And I'm saying, great, that's not leadership. That's not leadership. That's just bossing people around. That's not leadership. So are you interested in creating an environment where people can be at the very best? Oh yeah, great. Now that's it. That's what leadership is. So we have this bad vision of leadership, which turns people off. I got the same. We see that over and over. Here's the thing. I'm going to flip it back. First of all, you got to start with yourself. You got to get your head right on this. And I'm going to give you a couple of activities that you can do. Number one, pretend you've already been fired. So as a submarine commander, it's like, I had this sort of care, don't care. So I said, well, imagine I'm already fired or I'm already leaving. Let's say you're leaving in 6 months. Doesn't matter what you do. Just be the best. So what happens is now you're not focusing on, I'm worried about creating an image or that kind of thing. You're just focused on the work. That helps you out. So pretend you've been fired. You've been replaced. What would your replacement do? Or just pretend like you've been fired. Number two, go to the next 10 times you go out to eat. See if you can get the server to choose your meal for you. Everything, the meal, the wine, everything. So in other words, you don't even know what it is until they put it in front of you. Most times when I say this, people go, oh yeah, I do that already. I say, what do you recommend? Chicken. Okay, I'll have chicken. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you don't know what it is until they set it in front of you. And you have to live with the anxiety of not knowing what it's going to be until it gets put in front of you. That's number one. So that's going to be something you need to reflect on. Number two, think about it from the server's perspective. They are going to be based on where you are and what time it is, and that are you in a group or not, foreign country or not, blah blah blah. They're going to be nervous about making this decision. Oh, what if you don't like it? You can give me a bad score, blah blah blah. So you have to make it safe for them. So I can give lectures about how I think you make it safe for other people to be bold, i.e. make decisions for me. But that's all nonsense. Just go practice it. Practice making it safe in a place where it doesn't matter. Yeah. Oh, well, I've never had someone scout. I've done this in many different countries. I've never had someone try and take advantage of me. Yeah. I've had amazing meals. If you choose when you choose, you're playing not to lose.
Yeah.
Because what you'll do is I know, like for me, I always like chicken Caesar. Great. Like it can be only so bad, but it can only be so good. Whereas if you play to win, you say, look, oh my gosh, I'm making something terrible I don't really like. Again, but you can set boundaries. Like, so I don't eat things with 4 legs. Like as long as it's on 4 legs, I'm fine. So I create clear boundaries, and then I could get like, they're like, oh, this just came in, or like the boat just came in off the dock. The fish is amazing. I would have never ordered that. So I got these amazing things, but the whole thing is stop talking about it. Just try it. If you're not going out to dinner, pick something else. Like, okay, so let someone else pick the next book you're going to read, and then actually read it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is a really good exercise for all of us to practice, because it's a little bit of like, oh, I hope it's a good one. And you know what? Regardless of what it is, you're going to do something you wouldn't have probably done otherwise. You may read a book you wouldn't have read otherwise. You may eat a meal you mightn't have chosen.
Exactly.
You veer off your Caesar salad. And
it's okay to set boundaries, but setting boundaries, like this is the legitimate leadership behavior. So for example, I wouldn't want to be overly prescriptive, because that means you're like, I want you to have a little bit of anxiety. So don't say, go to my Amazon reading list and like pick the next one. That's too safe.
Yeah.
But you could say, I really want it to be fiction or nonfiction, or I don't know. I'd probably just say, like if I were asking my wife, I would just say, hey, what book do you think I should read next? And she'd just flip me one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because she kind of already knows me and what all the things that are wrong.
I think this concept, and obviously, a lot of what we've talked about is creating that psychological safety, and which is, how comfortable people feel to take interpersonal risks and to share information and to push back on ideas. And when it comes to creating that safety, a big one for me, and that I've seen in my work with people in leadership roles, is make it safe for people to approach you and to push back on you and to give you feedback that, isn't the feedback you'd like to hear. You'd rather not have heard that, but to make it safe so they know that whatever they say, it's okay and they'll never regret it. And as a mother, as a parent, I do that with my kids. I never want my kids to regret telling me something, even though at times it's like, oh, yeah. I'm like, thank you for telling me. But when it comes to creating that safety, I think leaders need to be continually very mindful of what they're doing that could be potentially undermining that sense of safety.
Sure. Yeah. So our thing on feedback is don't give feedback. People don't care about your feedback. Invite feedback. You want a culture where people inviting feedback all day long. If people aren't asking for feedback, people are not going to be interested in your feedback, no matter how nice or whatever you say it to them. So you want to say, hey, how's your day? Like, how could I have made it better? How could I have made it better? How well did I, you were telling me about a problem. You were telling me about a thing with your friend. How well did I listen to you? How well did you feel like I really listened to you? Or was, no, not really so much. Like you were just waiting to talk. Oh, okay. Thank you. And then anything else? And I always ask for one more. Like they're beating me on, boom, and this and this. Like, oh, great. Anything else? Like, what else? Is that it?
Yeah.
So always be inviting feedback and set a culture of inviting feedback. Forget giving feedback.
That is awesome advice. I have one last question to finish up with you. And that was from my son, Matthew, today.
That's going to be the hardest one of the day.
Yeah. I don't know. And I messaged him this morning. He's a freshman this year. And as I said, he wanted to go to the Naval Academy. He's going to apply again this year. Yeah. But he said, Mum, ask him if there's what he would change. If there was anything he would change in his military service, what would it be?
Yeah. So I would say I would do more horizontal leadership. So what I mean is this. So here's the organization. And let's say I'm this person in the middle. I'm the black dot in the middle. Mm-hmm. My focus was 98% up and down. It was what is my boss telling me to do and getting my team to do it, or inviting my team to help us, that kind of thing. But the focus was always like this. Yeah, I had peers and I talked to them and whatever. And the result of this focus is you'll hear people over and over and over again. People call it stovepipe, on and on and on. And what I would do is, especially as I moved up in the organization, I would spend more, I would allocate more of my minutes to what I would call horizontal leadership, which is just interaction with my peers more. I would find vehicles to have more constructive interaction with them. I would focus on helping them more, and I just would have done more of that. I guess that's what I would have shifted, even to and up to including being a submarine commander, because I was so like this, like you don't even see the other submarine commanders. They're off submerged on the ocean just like you are, and you end up kind of in this insular world, and 99.999% of your attention is on your team and your mission and your team. And I would have done a little more of that. Yeah. That's good advice. And actually, I think that applies for all of us, doesn't it? You can get very focused on what's immediately on your plate versus looking out and actually just continually inviting feedback and learning what's your best practice, what's your learning, and trying to learn from each other's experiences. I think that applies in every context of life, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, David, thank you very much for your time and your insight, and thank you very much for your service as well. And it's been a pleasure to have you on this live stream on my Live Brave podcast as well. Thank you so much, and thanks to all the listeners. Just pretend you already got fired, everybody. You'll have no fear.
Way to
Cheers.
go. Okay, bye-bye.
Make the world a better place.